Can you believe it? My wife suggested we try an open relationship. I took that as my chance to get back at her for being a traitor, but let's unpack this story step by step. So, where do I even begin? Jessica and I had been together for more than 10 years, and things were okay, I suppose. Not terrible, not amazing, just consistent. You know how it goes. Daily routines, work commitments, bills piling up, and maybe a movie on Friday night if we were feeling adventurous. But for Jessica, okay just didn't cut it. To her, fine was merely code for boring. And that's where all of this chaos kicked off. We hadn't felt that passionate spark in quite some time. Sure, the frequency of intimacy had dwindled. I won't sugarcoat it, but I genuinely didn't think it was a major issue. Honestly, I was under the impression that nothing was amiss. Clearly, I missed the crisis alert she had programmed in her mind. Initially, she dropped vague hints, subtle comments like, "Don't you think we could use a bit more excitement in our lives? Or wouldn't it be thrilling to spice things up?" I shrugged them off, assuming she was just talking about planning a vacation or picking up a new hobby together. Normal stuff couples do, right? Then came that fateful evening. We were lounging on the couch, half-heartedly watching a Netflix show, when she blindsided me with, "Ryan, I've been pondering, what if we opened our marriage?" I swear I thought I misheard her, or that she was joking. An open marriage? As in, we could sleep with other people and then chat about it over dinner? I'm not a prude, but seriously, this was Jessica, the woman who would fume if a waitress even glanced at me. Now, out of nowhere, she's proposing the idea of sleeping with other guys? I was taken aback. All I could stammer was a shocked, "What the hell are you talking about?" But she was completely serious, launching into this elaborate speech as if she'd been rehearsing it for ages. "It's about embracing something new, injecting excitement back into our lives," she insisted. "We'd still be committed, but we'd also have the freedom to explore, intimately." Intimately? She said that like it was a fancy dish on a restaurant menu, not the nuclear option for our marriage. It felt like I'd been gut-punched. My mind was racing. All I could think was, has she already met someone? Is there some guy in her life convincing her that this is a great idea? I bombarded her with questions. Is this about someone else? Who have you been talking to? Are you cheating on me already? But Jessica remained unflappable, deflecting every inquiry like a seasoned pro. "No, Ryan, it's not like that. I believe it could be beneficial for us. A way to grow together." Grow together? Really? Because nothing screams teamwork quite like sharing your partner with strangers. Our discussions became increasingly charged after that. Whenever I attempted to bring it up, Jessica would shut me down, acting as if I was the unreasonable one for not being open-minded. She twisted my words, making me feel like some old-fashioned caveman who couldn't adapt to modern times. Every time she labeled me as closed off or suggested I was afraid of change, it felt like she was chipping away at everything I believed our marriage represented. I was at a loss for who to confide in. This wasn't exactly the kind of topic you bring up at a barbecue, right? So I turned to my best buddy, Ethan. I recounted the entire saga, expecting him to be on my side to say, "Yeah, man, that's messed up." Instead, he hit me with some new age nonsense about how a lot of couples are doing it these days, and that maybe I should attempt to see things from Jessica's viewpoint. "It could be an adventure," he remarked. "An adventure? Yeah, like jumping out of a plane without a parachute." The worst part? Jessica started acting as if everything was perfectly normal. She would discuss this open marriage concept like it was already set in stone, as if we had reached an agreement. She'd say things like, "Once we get into the swing of things, you'll see how beneficial it is for us. We'll grow closer. Trust me." And she had this infuriating grin on her face, as if she were presenting me with a twisted gift. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. To make matters worse, she became more distant and self-absorbed. She'd spend hours in front of the mirror before heading to work, selecting outfits she'd never bothered with before. She'd return home late, claiming she was working overtime or grabbing drinks with colleagues. All the while, she kept insisting that this was the path forward for us, the solution to saving our marriage. It was like living with a stranger who had taken over my wife's body, and every word she spoke felt like a dagger to my heart. There were nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, questioning where it all went awry. Was I really such a terrible husband? Had I overlooked the signs for years? Or was she simply bored of me? A part of me wanted to grab her, shake her, and scream, "How did we end up here?" But another part of me, a quieter, wearier part, was just drained. Drained from trying to decipher what she truly wanted. Drained from feeling like nothing I did was ever sufficient. And the hardest truth? Knowing that regardless of how much I pleaded, argued, or reasoned, Jessica was going to do whatever she wanted, with or without my blessing. Have you ever tried to convince yourself of something you know, deep down, is absolute nonsense? That's exactly what I did. For weeks, I wandered around like a zombie, replaying Jessica's words in my mind over and over. I didn't want to agree to this open relationship nonsense. It felt like sacrificing my soul to keep the peace. Yet, at the same time, I was desperate to cling to any semblance of normalcy I could find. I catch myself thinking, maybe I'm the one who's stuck in the past. Perhaps this is how marriages are meant to evolve. Yeah, I get it. Pathetic, right? Eventually, I caved. I can't even pinpoint how it happened. Maybe I simply grew weary of the battle. Or perhaps Jessica wore me down with her relentless "we need this" speeches. One night I told her, "Fine, if this is what you truly want, then we'll give it a shot." She was overjoyed, of course, acting as if I'd just agreed to a weekend getaway rather than dismantling our marriage. She wrapped her arms around me, kissed me, and whispered, "You won't regret this." Ironically, that was the first time she'd shown me that kind of affection in months. It made me feel used, like I was merely a pawn in her game, finally moving according to her wishes. So I tried to embrace the role of the modern man, acting as if I was totally on board with this whole idea, that I was completely fine with it. But inside, it felt like something was rotting away. Every morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach, a mix of fear, anger, and self-hatred. I did my best to conceal it, wanted to be the kind of guy who could roll with the punches, the one who was cool with the new rules. I kept convincing myself that maybe this would actually work, that it might save whatever was left of our relationship. But it didn't. If anything, it only made matters worse. Jessica transformed almost overnight. It was as if she suddenly viewed the world through a completely different lens, one where I was simply invisible. She began investing more time and effort into her appearance. Suddenly, she was going out of her way to look breathtaking. And I'm not talking about just looking put together. I mean full-on seductress vibes. Tight dresses, flawless hair, makeup that screamed, "Look at me." As I watched her leave the house, instead of feeling proud and thinking, "Wow, my wife is stunning," all I could think was, who the hell is she trying to impress? I also noticed the late nights piling up. She started coming home later and later, always armed with some weak excuse. Work ran long, or the girls and I grabbed a drink. But those excuses were so flimsy that I couldn't help but wonder if she even cared enough to lie convincingly. There were times she'd stroll in, a bright smile plastered on her face, acting as if nothing was amiss, asking me about my day like we were still that blissful couple from years gone by. I could hardly look her in the eye. Before long, the suspicion began to seep in. My gut was screaming at me, and I couldn't brush it aside. There was no way this was just innocent fun. I knew Jessica well enough to detect when she was being dishonest. The way she'd look away when I asked about her day, the forced cheerfulness in her tone. It was all a facade, and it was all for someone else. I was convinced she was seeing someone. I just needed proof. I had to witness it with my own eyes before I did something reckless, like confront her and risk looking like an insecure fool. So, I did what any desperate guy would do. I followed her. One Wednesday night, I told her I was working late. She nodded, hardly paying me any mind as she prepared for another night out with the girls. I parked my car a few blocks away and watched. She stepped out of the house, looking like she'd walked straight off a magazine cover. My stomach churned. I gave her a head start and then tailed her, keeping my distance so she wouldn't catch on. She drove across town, and before long, I found myself parked outside a fancy restaurant, the kind we hadn't been to in ages. And there he was, some guy, waiting for her by the entrance, tall, with a cocky grin, as if he were the best thing since sliced bread. I watched as Jessica practically glided into his arms, greeting him with a hug that lingered just a moment too long. The way they gazed at one another, God, it felt like a punch to the gut. You know that chemistry two people have, that unspoken connection? That's what I saw. She was giggling, twirling her hair, leaning in close as they chatted. It was as if I didn't even exist in her world anymore. I remained in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. A part of me wanted to storm in there, flip a table, drag Jessica out by her arm, and create a scene for everyone to witness. But I didn't. I just sat there, watching them share a meal, sip wine, and act as if they were the only two people on the planet. When she came home later that night, she had the nerve to waltz in with a smile plastered across her face. "Hey, babe," she greeted, as if everything was perfect, as if she hadn't just spent the last 3 hours fawning over some guy while I sat at home, losing my mind. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I was done pretending to be cool with this. "Where the hell were you?" I spat, unable to contain the venom in my voice. She gave me that rehearsed look of shock, as if I'd just asked the most ridiculous question imaginable. "I told you, Ryan. I was out with the girls." "Bullshit," I snapped. "You were with some guy. I saw you." The way her expression shifted, it was like she hadn't anticipated getting caught so soon. But she quickly regained her composure, her eyes narrowing defensively. "Are you following me now?" "Jesus, Ryan, what's your issue? We agreed to try this. You can't accuse me of cheating when we have an open marriage." "An open marriage." She said it as if it were a golden ticket that made everything okay. As if the moment I reluctantly nodded in agreement, it meant she was free to go out and sleep with whoever she wanted, no questions asked. My anger surged, spilling out into the air around us. Open doesn't mean sneaking around behind my back. I never consented to this. Her expression hardened, becoming colder. "Maybe you should figure out what you actually want, Ryan, because this back-and-forth nonsense isn't cutting it. You're either in or you're out." And there it was, a challenge, a dare to call her bluff, to end things once and for all if I couldn't handle her so-called adventure. But I wasn't ready to make that call. Not yet. Instead, I stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me, leaving Jessica standing there with that same smug expression on her face, the look that said she was winning whatever twisted game she thought we were playing. After that explosive fight with Jessica, I realized something crucial. I couldn't just sit back and let her make a fool out of me. I couldn't unsee the image of my wife snuggling up to some guy while I was left simmering in the parking lot like a complete idiot. The anger coursed through me, mixed with a bitter humiliation that left me sick of pretending to be the understanding husband. Have you ever reached that breaking point? When everything inside you snaps, and you decide you're done trying to make sense of the madness. That was me in that moment. I began plotting how to flip the script, how to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she was inflicting on me. What better weapon than to turn her twisted concept back on her? "Oh, you want an open relationship? Let's see how you handle it when I'm out there having my own fun." The thought felt risky and a little dirty, but the idea of watching Jessica's expression when she realized she wasn't the only one playing this game fueled my resolve. I threw myself into the dating scene, hoping to find someone willing to join me in this little escapade. But let me tell you, it was far from easy. After years of married life, jumping back into the single world was like stepping onto an alien planet. Initially, it felt clumsy. I was that awkward guy at the bar, fumbling through conversations with complete strangers. And don't even get me started on dating apps. Half felt like scams, and the rest just made me feel completely out of my element. Each profile I swiped through was a harsh reminder of how long it had been since I'd navigated this territory. But I was determined. For weeks, I frequented bars, mingled at happy hours, and even tried my hand at online flirting, all while Jessica gallivanted off on her adventures. It turned into a twisted competition of who could open up the most, even if I wasn't being completely honest about it. Yet, I felt like I was slogging through mud. Most women were either terrified at the idea of dating a married man or vanished the moment they learned about my open marriage. Not that I could blame them. The entire situation reeked of chaos. Then came Chloe. I was about ready to throw in the towel when I stumbled across her profile on an app. It was refreshingly candid. She wanted nothing serious, just someone to have a good time with. I shot her a message, not expecting much, but to my surprise, we hit it off. She had this no-nonsense attitude, a sharp wit, and a laugh that felt like a breath of fresh air in the whirlwind of my life. We began chatting daily, and before long, we met for drinks. Chloe was a breath of fresh air. She radiated confidence, as if she genuinely didn't give a damn what anyone thought. When I opened up about Jessica and the whole open relationship debacle, she didn't flinch. Instead, her eyes lit up with curiosity as she leaned in, eager to hear every detail. How it started, how it made me feel, the works. It was as if she found my marital disaster fascinating, like my life was the latest gripping episode of some soap opera. I wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or utterly embarrassed. "Let me get this straight," she said, swirling her drink thoughtfully. "Your wife wants an open marriage, but gets mad when you have a problem with her going out with some guy?" "Pretty much," I replied, a mix of shame and annoyance flooding me. Chloe chuckled, shaking her head. "Sounds like she wants all the fun without any of the fallout." Classic. That's when she pitched the wild, audacious idea that could turn everything upside down. "Why not let her experience her own medicine?" she suggested, leaning closer with a playful glint in her eyes. "Invite me over, introduce me as your special friend. Then let's see how she reacts when things get cozy between us." She raised an eyebrow, clearly awaiting my reaction. I was taken aback. The sheer audacity of it was both shocking and thrilling. It was exactly the kind of chaos Jessica had introduced into our lives. And now here I was, being handed a golden opportunity to turn the tables. But I hesitated. Could I really go through with something so bold? Sure, I was furious, seething really, but was I the kind of guy who would stoop to this level? And what would it even accomplish? "Don't overthink it," Chloe said, sensing my uncertainty. "You're not doing anything wrong. She opened this door. She can't be mad when you walk through it. Besides, I'm game to help. Looks like you could use a win for a change." A win. That's precisely what it felt like. Finally gaining the upper hand in a situation where I'd felt utterly powerless. Jessica had practically dared me to embrace this open lifestyle, so why not give her what she claimed to want? Or at least what she pretended she wanted. The more I considered it, the clearer it became. If this was the game she wanted to play, perhaps it was time for me to play for keeps. So, I agreed. In the following weeks, Chloe and I continued to meet. Our encounters began casually, just drinks, conversation, the occasional kiss. But as time went on, the lines between revenge and something more started to blur. It felt invigorating, liberating even. It was as if I was reclaiming pieces of my dignity. And Chloe? She was fully committed to the ride, teasing me about the inevitable showdown with Jessica, joking about the look on her face when she discovered us together. The plan was straightforward. I'd invite Chloe over for a small gathering, just her, me, and a few other friends. Then, when the moment was right, I'd make my move, slink my arm around Chloe, lean in for a kiss in front of Jessica, and watch the fireworks explode. It was all set to be this grand moment of revelation, a dramatic confrontation where I'd unveil Jessica's hypocrisy for everyone to see. But as the day approached, I began to have second thoughts. Was this really me? Was I genuinely going to go through with it? Sure, Jessica deserved to be held accountable. But was I prepared to turn our crumbling marriage into a public spectacle? Each time I thought about it, I wavered between feeling like a righteous avenger and a complete scoundrel. And yet, I couldn't shake the thrill of it. The idea of finally reclaiming control, of standing my ground, and proving to Jessica that I wasn't going to roll over and accept her nonsense. It was intoxicating. The day of the gathering arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. Jessica didn't suspect a thing. She left the house that morning as if everything was just fine while I stayed behind to prepare. Chloe showed up early, looking stunning, of course, and fully ready to play her part. I could see the excitement and anticipation sparkling in her eyes. And honestly, it was contagious. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in control, like I held the reins of this story. When Jessica finally stepped through the door, I was primed and ready to witness her carefully constructed little world crumble, ready to force her to face the fallout from her idea of freedom. And there was Chloe, right by my side, fully committed to her role. But the moment Jessica walked in, I realized something. No matter how much I prepared myself, nothing could truly brace me for the chaos that was about to unfold. With the plan set in motion, the hours crawled by, and my nerves felt like they were on fire. I had rehearsed the scenario 1,000 times in my head. Jessica enters, spots me with Chloe, and chaos ensues. But when that moment finally arrived, I found myself unprepared for the intensity of facing it all head-on. It was like standing on the train tracks, daring the oncoming train to hit me. The party began quietly. A few friends trickled in, drinks in hand, laughter echoing in the living room. But all of that felt like background noise. The only thing racing through my mind was what would happen when Jessica walked through that door. And Chloe, she played her part flawlessly. She was flirty, charming, electric. We exchanged glances across the room, subtle touches, knowing smiles. To everyone else, we were just two people enjoying each other's company, perhaps a little too friendly for a married guy, but nothing scandalous. But for me, this was a high-stakes game, one where I stood to gain everything or lose whatever shred of dignity I had left. Then it happened. I heard the jingling of keys at the front door, and time seemed to freeze. Jessica entered, looking like she always did after work, confident, a bit fatigued, and blissfully unaware. For just a split second, she wore a look of surprise, as if she'd forgotten I was hosting friends. But then she spotted Chloe. To my surprise, she didn't explode right away. That was the part that caught me off guard. Jessica is sharp. She doesn't dive in head first without gauging the situation first. Instead of marching over and causing a scene, she offered me a tight-lipped smile, meandering around the room to greet everyone, trying to maintain an air of calm. It was almost impressive how she held it together. Almost. But I knew better. I caught the way her eyes narrowed as she assessed Chloe, cold and calculating, sizing her up, trying to figure out who this woman was and why she seemed so comfortable with her husband. It felt like watching a volcano on the brink of eruption, and I was just there, ready to poke the beast. When Jessica finally approached us, she forced a sugary smile and asked, "So, aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" The tension in the air was palpable. You could practically feel it crackling between them as she glared at Chloe, searching for answers in her eyes. "Oh, this is Chloe," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual, as if this were all perfectly normal. She's my date for the evening." I tossed that word out there like a grenade, fully aware of how Jessica would react. It landed with the impact I anticipated. For a moment, her expression went blank, as if she couldn't comprehend what she'd just heard. But she quickly masked it, forcing a laugh as if it were all some elaborate joke. "Oh, really? Your date?" she asked, striving to keep her voice steady. "So, this is what an open relationship looks like to you?" Chloe, bless her, didn't miss a beat. She leaned in closer to me, her hand trailing up my arm as she shot Jessica a cheeky, knowing grin. "Well, Ryan did mention that you were the one who suggested it," she said, fluttering her eyelashes like she was in on some grand secret. "I have to admit, I think it's such a progressive idea." And just like that, the spark ignited. Jessica's face twisted in anger, her facade of calm crumbling in an instant. "What the hell is this, Ryan? Do you think it's funny to bring some slut into our home? Do you really believe humiliating me like this is some sort of game?" I had anticipated her explosion, but feeling the fury behind each word sent my heart racing. Still, I remained composed, calmer than I ever thought I could be in a moment like this. "I'm simply playing by the rules, Mel. You're the one who wanted an open relationship, remember? Well, here I am, trying to make it work." The look in her eyes was pure, unfiltered rage. She opened her mouth, seemingly ready to unleash a torrent of words, but they died on her lips, as if she couldn't express her anger without choking on it. And that's when Chloe took the plunge. She turned to me, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed me. Not just any kiss, a passionate, no-holds-barred kiss that left nothing to the imagination. Jessica's reaction was instantaneous. She let out a guttural sound, half a scream, half a sob, and shoved the coffee table aside with such force that drinks went flying. "You piece of shit," she yelled, her voice cracking. "I knew you were pathetic, but I never thought you'd stoop this low." A twisted sense of satisfaction welled up inside me, like I had finally flipped the script and made her confront how messed up this whole situation was. But in that moment, it didn't feel good. Not really. Watching her storm out of the house, slamming the doors so hard that the walls shook, left me feeling hollow. All the pain and anger had culminated in this ugly moment, and now there was nothing left. After Jessica left, the party deflated. Our friends, clearly uncomfortable with the fallout, made their excuses and departed, leaving me and Chloe alone in the living room. She looked at me with a knowing smile, as if she could see every thought whirling around in my head. "That was intense," she said softly, running her fingers through her hair. "You okay?" I let out a long, shaky breath, unsure of how to respond to Chloe's question. Was I okay? Not really. I was a whirlwind of emotions: relief, regret, anger, sadness. But one thing was clear. I had no remorse for what I'd just done. Jessica had pushed me to my limits, and for once, I'd pushed back. "Yeah," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think I needed to do that." Chloe moved closer, wrapping her arms around me in a comforting embrace. It felt nice to be held, to soak in someone's warmth after the chaos that had just unfolded. She looked up at me with those bright, playful eyes and said, "Well, if it helps, you did great." Then she kissed me again, but this time it was slower, more tender, like a soothing balm over all the madness. Before I knew it, we were curled up on the couch, completely lost in each other. For the first time in ages, I allowed myself to relax and feel something other than pain and anger. When Chloe whispered, "Why don't we head upstairs?" I didn't hesitate. I craved this, needed to lose myself in someone else, to escape the nightmare my marriage had become. The intimacy we shared was electrifying, releasing all the tension and fury I had bottled up over the past weeks. It felt like freedom, a reckless, dangerous kind of freedom that I knew was temporary. But for those precious hours, with Chloe's body pressed against mine and her breath warm against my skin, I felt alive again. Maybe, just maybe, I could emerge from this mess intact. The morning after the party, reality crashed down like a freight train. The clarity I felt was brutal, the kind that hits hard when the anger fades, leaving you to confront the wreckage you've created. Jessica was gone. Not just out for a stroll or a quick drive, but completely absent. No texts, no calls, nothing. I knew exactly why. Last night had crossed a line, one that we could never uncross. The thrill of revenge had morphed into a heavy weight of regret, like I'd finally hammered the final nail into the coffin of our marriage. For the next few days, I floated through a fog, replaying the entire scene in my mind. The kiss, the screaming, the deafening slam of the door. Jessica's face haunted me. How she looked when she realized what was happening, the raw fury and hurt etched in her features. As much as I hated to admit it, guilt washed over me. I felt guilty for the spectacle we had created, guilty for dragging Chloe into it, guilty for becoming the man I never wanted to be. Yet, deep down, a part of me recognized this was simply the inevitable end of something that had long since died. When Jessica finally returned, it wasn't with apologies or an olive branch. No, she came in like a storm, demanding that we talk. I could see from her eyes that there was no returning to the way things were, no fixing what had shattered. Her expression was sharp, every word laced with contempt. "So this is who you are now, huh?" She spat as soon as she entered. "Some pathetic jerk who needs to put on a show to feel like a man?" I struggled to maintain my composure, but the anger flared up as quickly as it had before. "Don't you dare twist this around on me, Jessica. I did what you asked. This is what you wanted, right? An open relationship? Or was that just your excuse to screw around behind my back?" "Oh, don't act innocent," she retorted, practically trembling with rage. "You didn't have to do that. Bringing her here, flaunting it in my face. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" "Humiliating?" I yelled, finally losing my cool. "How the hell do you think I've felt for months, Jessica? You think it's easy knowing my wife is out with another guy, pretending it's all for the good of our marriage? Give me a break. You asked for this, and now you can't handle it." It was like we were speaking two different languages, and every word only fanned the flames of our argument. We shouted over each other, voices raised, tearing each other down with every chance we got. She accused me of insecurity, of ruining what could have been a beautiful new chapter for us. I hurled her lies back at her, exposing how she had turned our marriage into some twisted experiment. All the pent-up frustration and resentment we both carried erupted, louder and uglier than I could have ever imagined. By the end, we were both gasping for air, standing there like fighters at the end of a grueling match, neither willing to back down. And then came the silence, the deafening realization that there was nothing left to say. Maybe we should just end it, I said finally, the words bitter on my tongue. Maybe we're better off apart. Jessica didn't flinch. She simply nodded, her jaw set tight. Fine, let's get a divorce. And just like that, everything was reduced to one angry, impulsive decision. Years of marriage, a decade of shared memories, all gone in an instant. As she walked out again, this time for good, I felt like the ground had vanished beneath me. I wanted to chase after her, to fix everything, to take back every stupid word I had said. But I didn't. I just stood there, paralyzed by the weight of what had just transpired. What followed was a blur of legal battles, lawyers, asset division, paperwork. We divided everything: the house, the savings, the countless items we had gathered over the years. If you think that sounds clinical and straightforward, you'd be sorely mistaken. Every meeting felt like ripping open a wound. There were days when I'd leave the lawyer's office and just drive aimlessly for hours, lost in my thoughts, grappling with all the what-ifs and regrets swirling in my mind. Our friends? Well, they all chose sides, just as I expected. Some rallied behind me, insisting I was justified in standing up for myself, that Jessica had pushed me beyond my limits. Others took her side, branding me the villain for how I handled things, claiming I went too far with Chloe. It felt like our entire social circle had split in two, with everyone suddenly feeling entitled to judge our marriage as if it were some reality show for their entertainment. And there was Jessica, living her life far away from mine. The last I heard, she had moved in with the guy from the restaurant. So much for it being casual. She stopped reaching out, ceased all attempts to talk things over, as if she had finally found what she was looking for, and I had become nothing more than the old baggage she'd left behind. Part of me felt a strange relief, grateful that she wasn't pretending anymore. But another part, the part that remembered our good times, the part that still loved her in spite of everything, felt like it was slowly dying. Starting over was a struggle. I moved out of the house. It felt tainted with too many memories, too much hurt. I rented a small apartment across town, far enough to avoid running into Jessica, but close enough to remind me of her existence. I threw myself into work, trying to stay busy, trying to keep pushing forward. Yet, no matter how hard I fought to create a new life, the ghosts of the old one haunted me. Every corner of that apartment felt hollow. Every weekend stretched endlessly, and I couldn't shake thoughts of the life we once shared before it all fell apart. There were nights I found myself scrolling through my phone, staring at old photos, vacations, holidays, random moments of joy. I couldn't fathom how we had reached this point, how we went from two people who couldn't keep their hands off each other to two strangers who could barely share a room. Then I would shove those memories aside, focusing on anything else to keep myself from drowning in that sea of regret. I did see Chloe a few times after that night, but it was never the same. The passion, the thrill, it faded quickly. She was a great distraction, but deep down, I knew she wasn't who I truly wanted. She wasn't Jessica, and she understood that. Eventually, we drifted apart, and I didn't fight it. Maybe it was for the best. I needed time to heal, to figure out who I was without the weight of that toxic marriage, and dragging her into my mess wouldn't have been fair. So here I am, trying to pick up the pieces and navigate this new life, one without Jessica. Some days it feels liberating, like a heavy burden has finally been lifted. Other days, it feels like I'm wandering through a fog, unsure of where I'm headed, unsure if I'll ever truly be okay again. But if there's one thing I know, it's that this isn't the end. The story isn't finished yet. And maybe, just maybe, there's still something good waiting for me on the other side. Leaving town after the divorce felt like ripping off a Band-Aid. Painful, but necessary. I relocated to a new city, started a fresh job, and focused on living my own life for the first time in years. The new job wasn't anything spectacular, but it was stable, providing a much-needed structure. I found myself with free time that I didn't know how to fill, so I tried everything: hiking, running, hitting the gym. It felt like rediscovering who I was, free from the burdens of my past. Chloe and I met up a few times, but it quickly became clear that whatever we had was built on shaky ground. She was fantastic, but I wasn't ready to dive into anything serious. Too much baggage remained, too much healing left to do. So we parted ways, amicably, without drama. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, thinking about Jessica, not the one I fought with, but the woman I married, the one who made me laugh and who I once couldn't imagine living without. Yet I had to keep reminding myself that it was over, that she had chosen to leave, and that this was a decision we both made. Eventually, those memories stopped stinging quite so much. They became mere background noise. I began to understand something important. Revenge was hollow. Sure, it felt satisfying in the moment, but afterward, all it did was deepen the wounds. It didn't provide relief or peace. It merely shifted the anger back and forth, leaving me just as trapped as before. Once I let go of that mindset, once I stopped waiting for closure or apologies that would never materialize, I felt lighter. For the first time in ages, I was free from the lies, the drama, the relentless struggle. I won't pretend it's all sunshine and rainbows now. There are still days when I feel that pang of regret, that temptation to look back. But I've learned not to let it pull me down. I'm moving forward, day by day, figuring out what happiness looks like on my own terms. I'm not chasing after anything or anyone, just living my life and learning to be at peace with who I am. And for now, that's more than enough.